You know that feeling? When you're standing in a grocery store aisle and you pick up the name brand pasta sauce, check the price, put it back, and grab the generic one instead? Not because you can't afford the difference, not because $1.29 actually matters to you a month, but because somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet alarm is running, a low hum that never fully turns off. That alarm has a name, and the crazy part is, it's not a discipline problem. It's not a budgeting problem. It's not even really a money problem. It's a threshold problem. And there's a specific number that shuts the alarm off. That number is $500. My name is Pranav, and Shadow Wealth is where I break down the financial patterns most people never get taught. Why two people with identical salaries end up in completely different lives. Why one person walks into a negotiation confident and walks out with more money, while the other folds before the conversation even starts. Why one person sleeps through a market crash and the other panic sells at the exact wrong moment. The difference almost always traces back to one thing, and it's not what most financial content will ever show you. If you're someone who wants to understand what's actually driving your financial behavior, instead of just being told to budget harder, hit that subscribe button and drop a like if this ends up changing how you think. Because what I'm about to show you isn't really about $500. It's about what that $500 is doing inside your brain. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let me introduce you to two people. Same age, 27, same job, same salary, $52,000 a year at a logistics company in some completely average city. Same apartment building, same commute, same Friday evening takeout routine. Call them Arjun and Vikram. On a random Wednesday, both their phones buzz with the same message from their dentist. Overdue cleaning. Schedule now. Arjun books it within the hour. Doesn't think about it again. Vikram opens the message, feels a familiar tightness somewhere in his chest, closes the app, and tells himself he'll handle it after the month settles down. Same message. Same appointment. Two completely different internal experiences. 3 weeks later, Vikram's tooth starts aching. Now it's not a cleaning, it's a potential root canal. What was a $180 preventive visit now looking like a $1,300 problem? And here's what I need you to understand. Vikram isn't careless. Vikram isn't bad with money. Vikram isn't lazy. Vikram just didn't have $500 sitting in his account that week. That's the entire story, because when there's no buffer, every financial decision gets run through a fear filter first, and fear is an absolutely catastrophic financial advisor. Here's where this gets genuinely interesting. And this is exactly the part most people scroll past. There's a study out of Princeton that I keep coming back to. Researchers set up in a shopping mall and pulled in regular people off the floor. They gave half of them a scenario involving a small car repair, $150. They gave the other half the same scenario, but with a much bigger number, $1,500. Then, everyone took a standard cognitive test. Problem solving, reasoning, pattern recognition. For the higher income participants, it didn't matter which scenario they were handed. Their scores were essentially the same. But for the lower income participants, the ones who sat with the $1,500 repair scenario, the scores dropped hard. A full standard deviations lower. The researchers described the effect as comparable to losing an entire night of sleep. Let that land for a second. Simply worrying about a money problem you're not sure you can cover produces the same cognitive damage as pulling an all-nighter. And unlike an all-nighter, this doesn't reset after one rough day. For people without a financial buffer, this is the permanent background state. Every work meeting, every conversation at home, every decision, small or large, made slightly worse by a low hum of free financial static that never quite turns off. That's Vikram ignoring the dentist message. His brain isn't the problem. His brain is just fully occupied by something it was never built to carry indefinitely. Now, here's the number that should genuinely bother you. According to the Federal Reserve's most recent household economic survey, roughly 37% of American adults say they would struggle to cover an unexpected $400 expense using cash or savings. Not $4,000, not $40,000, $400. More than 1 in 3 people are operating right now in that cognitive deficit state, running every financial decision through a brain that's essentially already at capacity. And the brutal part is that the decisions you make from that state, the ones shaped by scarcity and fear, tend to dig the hole deeper. You skip the dentist and pay 7 times more later. You take the first salary offer because you can't afford the discomfort of pushing back. You don't raise your rates because losing the client feels too dangerous. Every one of those decisions has a price tag, and they all compound. Not in the direction you want. So why $500 specifically? Why not $300? Why not $2,000? This is where it gets interesting in a way most personal finance content completely misses. Research from the Urban Institute studied families with under $2,000 in liquid savings and found that even very small buffers, amounts between $250 and $749, meaningfully reduce the likelihood of material hardship after a financial shock. Not eliminated. Meaningfully reduced. The $500 mark specifically shows up repeatedly in behavioral finance research as a threshold where the psychological relationship with money starts to change character. And here's the important thing. It's not about the math. $500 doesn't cover a real emergency. It's barely a car repair. But something specific happens in your brain when you cross it. Your brain stops treating every financial decision as a potential crisis and starts treating some of them as actual choices. That is the shift. From reacting to choosing. Everything else that matters in personal finance lives on the choosing side of that line. Let me make that concrete, because this isn't abstract. It plays out in specific ways most people never connect back to the buffer. The first place it shows up is negotiation, not just salary negotiation. Every negotiation. The mechanic quoting you $900 when you know it should be $650. The landlord raising rent when you know the market doesn't support it. The client offering half your rate when you know your work is worth more. Without a buffer, every one of those conversations happens with a quiet gun to your head. You need this to work out. You cannot afford for it to fall apart. And the other person, consciously or not, picks that up. Desperation communicates itself without words. The moment the other party senses it, your position collapses. But $500 in the account creates something quiet in your nervous system before you walk into that conversation. You could walk away. You probably won't have to. But you could, and that possibility, that small sliver of optionality, changes everything about how you show up. You hold eye contact a beat longer. You let silence sit instead of filling it with the concession. Research from Carnegie Mellon found that negotiators who believed they had a viable outside option consistently achieved better outcomes than those who felt cornered, even when the outside option was never actually used. The safety net doesn't need to be deployed, it just needs to exist. The second place the buffer shows up is in career decisions, and this one is quietly costing more people more money than almost anything else. Think about your current job, or your last one. Were there moments you stayed quiet when you should have pushed back, where you accepted something unreasonable because walking away felt impossible? Where you watched someone else ask for exactly what you wanted and actually get it? That's not a confidence problem, that's a cushion problem. When the buffer is zero, your employer holds all the leverage, and both of you feel it. You cannot risk being fired. You cannot afford to quit. You cannot take 2 weeks to interview elsewhere. You are trapped. And the behavior of trapped people, staying small, absorbing bad treatment, never advocating, is completely rational given the situation. Now, think about the cost. Say you're earning $52,000 and you're $4,000 below your actual market rate. That's not a dramatic gap. But that gap, applied over 10 years with raises compounding off the lower base, is somewhere around $50,000 in lost earnings. Gone. Not because you lacked ability, because you couldn't afford the risk of the conversation. And that conversation never happened because there was no buffer. $500 doesn't recover $50,000 overnight, but it starts a psychological chain that eventually gets you into the room. Here's the third place the buffer shows up, and this one tends to catch people off guard. Investment behavior. There is one specific financial mistake that happens almost exclusively to people without buffers: panic selling. And it is one of the most expensive things a retail investor can do. JP Morgan analyzed S&P 500 performance over a 20-year window, fully invested the entire time, annualized return around 9.9%. Miss just the 10 best days in that window, and you drop to 5.1%. Miss 20 best days, and you're at 2%. Miss 40, and you go negative. The part that makes this particularly brutal is that the best days in the market cluster within 2 weeks of the worst days, almost every time. The people who sell during a crash are statistically the exact people who missed the recovery, and most of them didn't sell because they panicked emotionally. They sold because they needed the money. A job loss, a medical bill, a repair that couldn't wait. The investment account wasn't really an investment account. It was an emergency fund they were using by default because they never built a real one. Without a buffer, your investment decisions stop being investment decisions. They become survival decisions. And survival decisions made in a down market lock in losses that take years to climb back from. $500 sitting in a savings account feels almost embarrassingly small compared to money in an index fund. But That $500 is a firewall. It keeps the portfolio decisions in the portfolio and keeps the emergency decisions in a separate account designed to handle them. Now I want to talk about something that doesn't get enough attention. The way a buffer changes your relationship with time itself. When there's no cushion, your time horizon compresses involuntarily. You cannot think 3 years ahead when next month feels uncertain. Every decision gets filtered through one question. What does this do for me right now? And the problem is that every decision that actually builds wealth requires a longer horizon than that. Investing requires years of patience. Learning a high-value skill requires months before it pays back. Building something on the side requires upfront time before there's any return. Negotiating a better situation requires being willing to walk away today for a better outcome next month. All of these become psychologically out of reach when your planning horizon has been compressed to the next 2 weeks. The buffer is what stretches the horizon back out to something workable. When you know you can absorb a surprise, you start being able to think past it. And thinking past the immediate problem is where all the real financial progress actually lives. Let's talk about what actually keeps people from building the buffer, because this is exactly where most financial advice falls flat. The standard answer is cut expenses, track spending, make a budget. That's not wrong, but it misses the actual mechanism. The real barrier isn't information, it's identity. Behavioral economists have found that the size of your first financial contribution acts as a psychological anchor for everything that follows. If you started with nothing, nothing becomes your baseline. Your sense of what someone like you does with money. And when nothing is your anchor, saving $500 feels like a departure from your own identity. Not just a practical challenge, an identity challenge. The people who successfully build the first buffer almost always do it through automation that removes the active decision entirely, or through a specific internal reframe. The month they decided to become someone who has a buffer, it sounds like the soft kind of advice that doesn't do anything. But the research is clear. When people treat saving as an expression of who they are rather than a sacrifice they're making, follow-through improves significantly. You're not setting aside $500. You're becoming the kind of person who has $500. That internal shift is the whole thing. Here's what almost nobody mentions. The buffer compounds psychologically faster than it compounds mathematically. The first time you hit $500 and something unexpected lands, and you cover it without the stomach drop, without the spiral, without the 2 a.m. mental math, something changes. You prove something to yourself, not to a spreadsheet. To yourself. You are capable of handling a financial shock, and that proof changes what feels possible next. $1,000 stops feeling like a fantasy and starts feeling like the obvious next step. At $1,000, the car repair doesn't touch the credit card. At $2,000, the car repair leaves something behind. At 3 to 6 months of expenses, a job loss becomes a transition instead of a catastrophe. Each level unlocks something different. But the entire chain starts with $500. That first proof, that first time you cover the thing without flinching. That psychological return on investment doesn't show up in any calculator, but it compounds for decades. Now let's talk about relationships, because financial stress doesn't stay contained in your bank account. It moves. And the first place it moves is into your closest relationships. A major survey found that money is consistently the leading cause of conflict in marriages and long-term partnerships. Not communication problems, not lifestyle differences. Money! And when you look at what the actual conflicts are about, they're almost never the big philosophical disagreements. They're the $180 repair nobody planned for. The $70 dinner that landed at the wrong time. The subscription charge that hit when the account was thin. Small things made enormous by the absence of a buffer. Without a cushion, every unexpected expense becomes a conversation about blame and fear. Whose fault is this? Why didn't we have this covered? What do we do now? With a buffer, the same expense becomes logistics. We need to rebuild that. Here's how. Same money, completely different weight. The buffer doesn't only protect your account, it protects the quality of every financial conversation you have to have. And those conversations, repeated over years, either strengthen something or wear it down. There's one more dimension worth naming. The way financial stress affects physical health in very specific and documented ways. A study in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine found that financial strain was directly linked to significantly higher rates of delayed medical care. People weren't skipping appointments because they didn't care about their health. They were running the same calculation Vikram ran with the dentist. What if something is actually wrong and I can't cover it? When the answer is uncertain, the brain defaults to avoidance. The blood pressure that should have been flagged at 36 gets found at 49. The tooth that needed a cleaning needs a root canal. The thing that was a $200 conversation becomes a $5,000 problem. Medical debt is now the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. A large share of those cases trace back not to catastrophic illness, but to preventable issues that escalated because the early visit felt financially risky. $500 doesn't fix a broken healthcare system, but it changes the calculation enough that Vikram books the cleaning. And sometimes, that single decision is worth thousands. Let me leave you with one specific picture. Not a principle. A picture. Two versions of you 6 months from now. Version 1 spent the last 6 months the way the last 6 months usually go. Money in, money out, never quite enough left to build anything. Some weeks fine, some weeks tight. The buffer never happened because something always came up. Version 2 made one decision 6 months ago. Not an overhaul, not a new budget system. One decision. Automate $84 a month into a separate account the day after payday. Name it something real. Buffer, foundation, floor. Don't look at it, don't touch it, let it sit. 6 months later, version 2 has $504 in that account, and something quiet has shifted. The grocery store moment still happens sometimes, but it feels different. The dentist message lands differently. The conversation about a raise feels different. The investment account feels less like the last line of defense. None of these shifts are dramatic. None appear in any net worth tracker. But they are completely real, and they compound in ways that will be obvious in 5 years, and nearly invisible right now. Here's the practical part, because if you watch this far and nothing changes, I have not done my job. Step 1. Open a separate savings account today. Not your main account, not the one your rent comes out of, a separate one with a name that means something to you. Step 2. Set up an automatic transfer of whatever amount you will genuinely not cancel. Not what sounds responsible, what you will actually keep. $25 a week works. $50 a month works. Consistency matters infinitely more than size right now. Step 3. Do not touch it unless it is a real unexpected expense. Not a sale, not an impulse, a genuine shock. The car, the tooth, the bill that arrived without warning. Step 4. When you use it, refill it before anything else. Treat a refill like a fixed bill, because the goal is not to have $500 one time. The goal is to be the kind of person who always has $500. That identity is the anchor everything else builds on. $500 is not the destination. It is not a retirement plan. It is not financial independence. It is the first domino. The one that has to fall before any of the others can. Without it, you are always playing defense, always reacting, always making decisions from fear instead of from choice. And every decision made from fear has a hidden cost beyond the decision itself. It costs you in negotiations, you lose before they start. In investments, you panic out of at the worst moment. In career moves, you never make. In health appointments, you keep postponing. In conversations with people you love that go sideways, over $180. The buffer turns off the static. And when the static is off, you can finally hear what you actually want to do with your money. Most people who watch this will feel it click, will see the logic, will agree with every word, and will not set up the autopay. Don't be that person. The version of you that sets up the transfer today is the version that books the appointment next month. That has the salary conversation next quarter. That stays in the market through the next rough patch. That stops having the $180 argument. That version is 4 minutes away. The alarm is running right now. You can turn it off today, or you can keep running it. The math does not care.